Welcome to Maury's Playroom. Today what I'm going to do is talk about shofar, everything that you've ever wanted to know about shofar and was afraid to ask. Probably the most important thing to say about shofar and the high holidays, to start all of this off, is the commandment of the high holidays is to hear shofar, not blow shofar. So I've been blessed over the years to not only be able to hear it, but also to blow it. So what I'm going to talk about is what it is, the rules behind it, and because for the last, 20 some odd years I've been making shofar, I get to show you exactly a big collection of shofars and let you hear the different sounds. And then in the next tape, I will take you down into my workshop and we will make a shofar. And when I say make a shofar, actually, I got my fingers crossed that it's going to work because every time is a new experience. So what is a shofar? A shofar is a horn. It's important to understand that the word shofar does not mean ram's horn. Although you've been told to believe that, it just doesn't pan out. So shofar simply means horn. So there are some horns that we can use to make shofarot, and there are others that we can't. So what we're going to do is start out with what we can't use to make a shofar. The very first thing that we can't use to make a shofar is a garden hose. Makes a good sound. But somehow or other, back 3,000 years ago, they didn't have garden hoses. So scratch that. Then, the next thing we can't make it out of is a conch shell. Now, mind you, conch shells is used many, many places for ceremonial purposes. Doesn't work. Ivory, you say. Maybe a horn out of ivory. Well, although an ivory horn is hollow, or part of it is hollow, just isn't allowed. And the last is, what about bone? Can we make one out of bone? And, actually there are two. And this is a little bone piece that my brother, who's a musician and teaches music at the Shepherd School of Music in Houston, bought at an antique music store, and he sends it to me and he says, "Mo, I think I found a great shofar." Now I took a close look at it and had to call him and say, "It's beautiful, it makes a really nice sound, but it's an opium pipe." So that didn't quite work out. So we ultimately get down to the family bovine, ungulates that chew their own cud, and basically everything in that family is okay to build a shofar from except the cow horn. And the story behind that is that when Moses came off the mountain the first time with the commandments and found the people praying to a golden calf, that ended cows and bulls. So although this makes a pretty nice sound some of the time, it's a cow horn, doesn't work. So what does that leave us? It leaves us horns or antlers. Now, for those of you, did I bring an antler in? Yes, no, no. Anyway, antlers are the same as bone, mostly. They're made of calcium and phosphorus, and then other things that differentiate. Bones can heal themselves, teeth can't. But bone isn't hollow in and of itself, and it was never used. And again, bone has been used for years to make different kinds of flutes and horns. And 3,000 years ago, our ancestors said we can use the horn of a ungulate, a antelope, a cloven-hoofed animal. Now, what is horn? Horn is basically your fingernail. No different, pretty much the same. And it grows on a skull plate. So this is the skull of a goat. And what you see is coming out of the skull are these bones, which is actually part of the skull. So unfortunately, the only way to get a horn is either, as they do with cattle, cut it off at the base, so a bull isn't dangerous, or kill the animal. So all of the horns that I have are basically culled animals, almost all of them from Africa. Ram's horns come from everywhere. All right, so how does it grow? Effectively what happens, and here's the horn, here's the skull plate, and what you can see is it just comes off, and what's left is the skull plate and this fingernail in the shape of a hollow tube with a closed end. Now the closed end makes sense because this is their defense. This is for, the bigger the horn, the bigger the you-know-what. And so in competitive, if you've got a bigger horn, you've got a bigger something else, and that serves you. All right, so now we have horns. Many different kinds of horns. We've established that the one horn that you can't use is a cow horn. So I'm going to start out with some of the horns that you can use. And, my favorite one to fool the rabbis is this, because what is that? It's a buffalo horn. Now, there weren't buffaloes in the Palestine and Israel area in the 1st century, 2nd century, 10th century BCE, so they didn't know what it is. The rabbis would like you to pretend like we can't use this, but actually we can. All right, let's, before I start showing you all of these, I'm going to use my notes here for a second. Let's do some other things that are important to know about shofar in Torah. It's mentioned, the shofar is mentioned 72 times. The nice part about 3,000 years is you can count everything. For all of us to fulfill the commitment of hearing shofar, we only need to hear 10 sounds. The 10 sounds that we have to hear is the takia, shevarim tarua, takia again, takia, shevarim, takia, takia turua, takia, or takia gedolah. Now, one of the other interesting things is, why do we have as the first sound after takia? Because takia is just a long, simple sound. Let's find the shofar here. I imagine I can do that. And what is a takia? Just a simple sound. The next sound is shevarim tarua. So what happens is, there was never a notation to decide what shevarim sounded like or tarua sounded like. So they figured out what they would do is put the two sounds together that they had sort of decided this is maybe what it would sound like, because if you look in Torah, all you have is some squiggly lines that indicate that it's time to blow the shofar. And so the shevarim tarua that you're used to hearing, and we all play, is okay. One more time, here we go. And finally, again, another tarua. And if we break them down, shevarim and tarua. And teruah is done 9 times, and there's all kinds of discussion about what do each one of these different sounds, what is the significance of it, and then you can go look that up and figure it out for yourself. So I'm not even going to begin. I found too many different things of what teruah is supposed to be, shevarim, and tekiah. All right, let's begin to talk about the making of the shofar, because the other nice thing or interesting thing is when folk have 3,000 years, they get to define a great deal of rules about a shofar. So let's start with the simple thing. What's the minimum size that you can have a shofar? Well, this isn't quite minimum size, but a shofar has to have both sides of it from your hand. So if you have a very big hand, then you're going to have a big minimum shofar. So this clearly would constitute the size, whereas if this were kosher, my little ivory shofar would just make it, whereas my bone shofar ain't going to make it at all. So they start by saying it has to be a basic size. Then it can't have a hole in it. It can't have a split in it. Now they hedge that in that if it has a hole in it, if you use the material that comes from the horn, you can fix it. I've tried a number of times and it never works out, so that's why I say there's a lot of failures as you go through this. Then another question that comes up is, does the horn that we use to make a shofar, does the animal have to be killed in a kosher manner? The simple answer is no. And the reason for that answer is, the last time I checked, nobody ate horns. So the rule is very simple. If we were to be a food that we were eating, then it would fit within the rules of kosherut. But seeing as all we're doing is using it in a sense as a tool, then that doesn't apply. Now, shofar over the ages is another interesting thing. If you look at current shofarot, we are told we can't use fire and or heat to make the perfect shofar. Now, in reality, that isn't true, because almost all of the shofars that come out of 2 companies in Israel, they use heat to bend the ram's horn so you have that straight part that they can go through. Whereas in the 18th and 19th century, shofars were flat. And there were a group of people called horners. Little Jack Horner sat in the corner eating his Christmas pie. He stuck in his thumb and pulled out a plum and said, "What a good boy am I." Well, the horner, all of those nursery rhymes talk about guilds. The Horners Guild were the people that made things out of horn. And if you go back in history, window panes, lamps, combs, I haven't used one of those in a while, and other varied and sundry things were all made out of some kind of horn. And so there was this guild. Actually, there is a Horners Guild in the United States that I joined for a short time, but they actually do these revolutionary reenactments that make beautiful powder horns. I was not making powder horns, and they didn't really know what to do with a shofarist. All right, let's see, what else do we want to go? The sounds of the horn we've talked about. So let's talk about some different horns. So if you were to accept the Ashkenazi image of the horn, and all of these rules, by the way, are in the Shulchan Aruch, and I, not speaking Hebrew, managed to find a bunch of different translations, and I have an 8-page document, single-spaced, of all of the rules. So one of the rules that always is amusing to me is that you are supposed to blow the shofar out of the right side of your mouth with the horn aiming up, not down. What that does, though, when you begin to make horns, what you realize is that the only way to get a horn that will point up, that is curled, is to use the left-hand horn of the goat or the ram. Now, I can tell you, not every shofar is made from a left horn where they cull it out, and left ones go to shofars, right ones go to soup, or whatever they do with it. I guess it's paste. All right, so that's rule one that probably isn't found anywhere in practical. The other is just the idea of the ram's horn. Ram's horns are nice. I did one day decide to make one out of rams, although mostly I don't. They have a nice sound, but your usual ram horn is very squeaky. Can you run down and get my big horn from downstairs? So let's talk about some other things. One of my favorite non-ram's horns, actually it's a bighorn sheep, and it makes a very interesting sound. This little sucker weighs about 10 pounds. Pretty anemic sound for what I think is a beautiful horn. All right, crash, tinkle, tinkle. What else do we need to know? The rules. Again, let's talk about some rules about hearing shofar. And I just throw out a couple so you get a sense of the detail that exists. This is this is the one that I use all of the time. So the reason I was getting such bad noise is I'm not used to anything but this. See, it works right. All right. But I digress. Different horns. I guess what we will do is talk about, let's see, I gotta say, doing this in front of a iPad is just so strange to me. I hope I'm doing a decent job, and if I'm not, there's nothing you can do about it. There's nothing I can do about it. All right, different horns. Goat. Different kind of goat. And the other wonderful thing about a shofar is when you make a shofar, you actually have no idea what the sound's going to be, whether it's low or high. So, and the length of the horn doesn't seem to be as important as how big around it is. So, back to the rules. Things like, if you're in a cave and you're listening to the shofar being blown from outside of the cave, if it isn't an echo, it is kosher. If it's an echo, it's not kosher. If you're in a cave blowing and the person is outside of the cave and it's an echo, it's not kosher. They account for death while blowing. So if I start blowing and pass out, I can hand this shofar, or as I'm falling down, the next person in the minyan grabs it and continues blowing. But in the middle of his blowing, or he falls down. Anyway, you can go through 10 different people, and it will be kosher if it's continuous. They're very clear that to get paid to blow the shofar is just really bad juju. Ain't supposed to happen. The other piece that's interesting is that the chazan, the cantor, is not supposed to blow the shofar because it is usually the cantor that calls the shofar blowing. So the only way a cantor can do that, or chazan can do that, is if they do it perfectly. Otherwise, there has to be somebody else calling. Now, to give you an idea of the effects of 3,000 years of thinking about who can hear and how it's blown, there is one of the parts of the Shulchan Aruch is a rule that basically says only a hermaphrodite can blow the shofar for other hermaphrodites. Now think about that for a minute. This is a rule that maybe is 2,000 years old, and they wrote that in. The other one that I find most amusing right before Rosh Hashanah is there's a reality that if you put liquid inside of the shofar right before you blow, it actually creates a crisper sound. Now, the truth of the matter is by pouring water in, you've broken one of the rules, which has to do with you're not allowed to put a shofar within a shofar, and in a sense that layer of water molecules that smooths out the shofar to give it a better tone is a second shofar within a shofar. I raised that with my shofar crazy friends, and they just laughed at me and they said, that's minutia none of us should go to. The other thing is, they have built this in again to the rule book. I can pour wine down my shofar to make the sound crisper. I can put water in my shofar to make the sound crisper. But I'm not allowed to pee in the shofar to make it crisper. Now, I find the idea of peeing in it particularly disgusting, but the fact that they wrote it in the rule book has always been an amazement to me. All right, in making the shofar, there are certain things. It cannot have a mouthpiece. And for those of you who have seen my shofarot, they look like they have a mouthpiece. All that really is the natural horn versus the non-natural horn, if you will, or the ground horn. So you can't have a mouthpiece on it. You are not allowed to put anything within the horn, so you can't put, basically you can't varnish it, you can't put anything to make it not smell bad. So if you go on the internet, most shofarots now that are sold are from evangelic Christian sites, and there's this guy, a shofar man, who sells all kinds of shofars and pours probably an epoxy liquid something or other into it to make it not smell, so it's not kosher. You can cover your shofar from about here to about here with writing, with gold, with silver, nothing inside, and your mouthpiece can never have gold or silver on it, but you can actually write on it. Like I said, if it has a hole in it, you can't use it as a shofar. And near the end, I'm going to show a video of my apprentice grinding one of these, and we got talking about grinding through, and of course between one time meeting with him and the next time meeting with him, I was working on a real pretty shofar, and the first thing I noticed is I ground all the way through, and this beautiful horn got to be thrown out. All right, so what else? I'm gonna just make a couple of more sounds, and I think we've done close to 20 minutes. Helene, can you check the time on the machine there?
Where does it say?
It should say on the top right-hand corner or something like that. It should have a time.
24 minutes and 48 seconds.
Okay, 24 minutes and 48 seconds. Oh, I was going to show one other. Again, like I say, this is weird. one other thing that is fun. So in North America, there is only one native, quote unquote, antelope, animal that has a hollow horn, and it's a pronghorned antelope, and they're found in western United States in the mountains. And so they make a real nice little sound. They're tiny little things. When I travel during a luau, I frequently will take this one with me because it's just small, fits in my back pocket. But the interesting thing about a pronghorn antelope is it's not even in the antelope family. It's part of an ancient family where its closest living relative is a giraffe. So I've never really decided how legal these are, although I know I've made a number of them, and I have a close friend in Israel who has the Natural Museum of Torah. This is Natan Slefkin. If you ever want a fun website, go on to Zoo Torah. Natan is a very religious Haredi who wanted to run a zoo. And he and I met over shofars, and I brought him a pronghorn and a buffalo and a couple of others. So there's that one. And the other interesting one is this little thing, and it's from a sable antelope, or antelope that is no longer, a scimitar antelope that's no longer actually lives in the wild. The only ones that exist are in farms in Texas, or ranches in Texas, that and these are found out, if a animal dies. This is how I got it. It was through the internet. And just out of curiosity, to answer the question, where do I get all of these horns? It's from the internet. This one has a real nice sound. And the last thing I'm going to talk about here is just how different horns are built. And I thought I had the answers. You've noticed that on all of the horns that I make, you blow from the very end. And when we do take two on the construction of the horn, I'll show you that. But when I first started getting horns, I actually bought some from the Boy Scouts of America, who blow a shofar on their Jubilee something or other. I did buy out the quartermaster store, but when they do it, they do a side blow. And I did find actually one, I don't think it's a shofar, but somebody who took a ram's horn and made a side blow. And actually another friend, there's 5 of us from around the world who spend more time talking about shofars than we should. And Michael Chusett has written about 1,000 pages on it. He's down in Los Angeles, but the only ones he's made have been side blow. Anyway, I need Helene to turn this little sucker off. That's me rambling for a half an hour. Don't turn it off yet.
I'm not.
That's me rambling for a half an hour. As I said to Gordon and the rabbis, I can do this for 2 to 3 hours. I hope I haven't bored you. I haven't done all of the bad jokes that I usually do. And the next video will be downstairs in the workshop or around the workshop, where we will hopefully make a working shofar in it usually takes me about 5 to 7 minutes. And after that, we will be open, as far as I know from Gordon and everybody, for your questions, and we should have about 20 minutes. Thank you. I want to welcome you to my workshop. This is Maurice's workshop. I'll give you a panorama of it. I'm going to talk briefly about how you make a shofar and the tools needed. Let's start with just a quick diagram of what we're working with here. This is a bad rendition of any kind of horn, whether it's curved, straight, whatever. Basically, we have a hollow section. The outside keratin, again, the horn is the same material as our fingernails, and the tip. And as I explained yesterday, the tips of these things are used for protection, for all sorts of other things. To make a shofar, basically, I cut the tip off. After cutting the tip off, we have something that looks like this. I then take a drill and aim for this point in the V to get the best sound. Unfortunately, every so often, the drill goes the wrong way, goes out, and those are the ones that don't make it as drills. As shofars. The tools that I use are a saber saw. Some of the times, other times, I use a hand saw. As you can see, or maybe you can't see, I've got a collection of varied and sundry hand saws. And the only other thing that I use is a electric drill. And on the electric drill, there are two things I use. A bit for drilling into the shofar, and then to finish it, a countersink here. There's a countersink that makes my mouthpiece. I actually found this in a flea market maybe 18, 20 years ago, and I was told by a French horn player that it actually creates almost an exact replica of the mouthpiece of a French horn. So I've already pre-drilled this. I got lucky and actually found the right place, so air goes through it. After drilling it, I take the countersink, tighten it down on the drill, put it in, and drill the hole. That hole's a little stiff and not so good, so we will take the drill bit here just to make it a little bit easier to blow. And you can see and if we're lucky, we have a finished horn. Now, as you could see, probably from beginning to end, on a slow day, it maybe will take me 5 minutes to make a horn that looks like this, and another 5 hours to grind it down to make it look like this. Yesterday I talked about they're not allowed to have an inserted mouthpiece, like a trumpet or a trombone. You actually have a mouthpiece that goes into it. I make the what looks like a mouthpiece by just leaving a piece of the horn in its natural state here, and then grind everything from that point on. Let me give you a brief visual of the horns that I have and the sanders that are used. And this is as much as my workshop as you're going to see. As you can see here, the workspace, little cluttered, but that's sort of like my mind, and I've gotten used to it. On the other side of the garage, you can see the two grinders. The one that looks sort of like a horse bending its head down is the small grinder. That's to finish the mouthpiece and do the mouthpiece. And the finish work. The big grinder there is to do the rough work. I do have a short video of Matt, my apprentice, working there, which we'll show you in a few minutes. And down here you can see I actually have a few horns yet to work on, and hopefully over time I will manage to get them all finished. Now if I can get back in front of this, I will finish my little description here with a short story. The short story is a story about a young man. This is a Talmudic tale I made up a while back about the young man who asks the rabbi which is the most efficient way to experience the divine. Rabbi says there are three ways: in word, in music, and in silence. When asked which was the most efficient, the response is simple, and if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. When we hear words, the words fill our brain, fill our head, and there isn't much space for the divine to enter. When we're listening and experiencing music, frequently we are even told it is the music of the divine, the music of the heavens. And then to me and this rabbi that I made up, the most efficient way to experience the divine is in silence. And we get all three in the blowing of the shofar. It's part of the reason I love the magic of the shofar. The first is when Cantor Glaser calls the sound Tekiah Gedolah. I get to blow it, and then you get to experience it after I finish. I thank you. It's been wonderful doing this. A little weird, but wonderful. And it will close with a short blip of Matt actually grinding one of the horns. Again, thank you.